The moment I pushed open that hospital room door, my bag hit the floor. Not because of who was lying in that bed, but because I recognized her. Emma, my best friend's daughter. The little girl I'd helped raise after her mother died. The girl who called me Aunt Diane for 23 years. The girl I'd trusted. Lying in that hospital bed, wearing the diamond necklace my husband told me was stolen from his car. For 2 months, I'd been tracking my husband's affair, finding receipts, following him to hotels, listening to whispered phone calls in the middle of the night. The private detective I hired had finally given me her name, Emma Collins. But I never imagined this. Not this. Not her. This wasn't just adultery. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't have conceived in my worst nightmares, because Emma was 24 years old. I'd known her since she was 6 months old, cradled in my arms at the hospital when her mother was too weak to hold her. I was at her high school graduation, cheering louder than anyone else in that auditorium. I helped her move into her first apartment, spending an entire Saturday assembling furniture and stocking her kitchen with supplies. And my husband, my 52-year-old husband, had been grooming her, manipulating her, sleeping with her for God knows how long. My name is Diane Foster. I'm 49 years old. I've been married for 26 years to a man I thought I knew inside and out. I thought I understood every corner of my life, every relationship, every truth that mattered. I was catastrophically wrong. This is the story of how I discovered my husband's darkest secret, the web of lies he'd been spinning for years, and how I made absolutely certain he'd pay for every single deception. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further. What I found in that hospital room was just the beginning. The evidence I uncovered, the recordings I made, the legal destruction I unleashed, it all stemmed from that one moment when I saw her wearing my necklace. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how a 49-year-old woman took down a powerful attorney, exposed a predator, and reclaimed her entire life. You'll see the evidence. You'll hear the conversations. You'll witness the courtroom moment that destroyed him completely. Before we continue deeper into what happened, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and let me know where you're watching from, because I genuinely read every single one, and this community means everything to me. Now, if you value true stories like this, stories about real women facing real betrayal and fighting back, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Here's why this matters. I share these stories so that women going through similar situations know they're not alone, know they have options, know they have power. If you don't subscribe, you might miss the next story that could change your life or help someone you love. And honestly, if you're choosing not to subscribe, at least tell me why in the comments, because I want to understand what would make these stories more valuable to you. Turn on those notifications too, because the stories coming up are even more intense than this one. But to truly understand how I ended up standing in that hospital room, staring at a girl I'd loved like a daughter while she wore jewelry bought with my money, you need to know where this all started. Not 2 months ago, when I found the first suspicious receipt tucked in his jacket pocket. Not even 5 years ago, when I first noticed him changing, becoming distant, developing new habits that seemed out of character. This story actually started 23 years ago, on the worst day of my life. The day my best friend died and left behind a 6-month-old baby girl who would eventually become the weapon used to destroy my marriage. Sarah Collins was my best friend since college. We met during freshman orientation, 2 girls from small towns trying to navigate a massive state university, and we became completely inseparable within weeks. When I married Michael at 23, fresh out of graduate school and stupidly optimistic about the future, Sarah stood beside me as my maid of honor in a lavender dress she'd helped me pick out. 2 years later, when she married Tom at 25, I returned the favor, holding her bouquet and crying happy tears during the ceremony. We bought houses on the same street intentionally, spending months looking for properties close enough that our future children could run between backyards. We planned to raise our kids together, grow old on the same block, live out our lives as the family we'd chosen rather than the families we'd been born into. Then, when Sarah turned 26, she got pregnant after years of trying. Emma was born on a rainy Tuesday in March, and I was right there in that delivery room, holding Sarah's hand through every contraction, every push, every moment of pain and joy. I was the first person besides Sarah to hold that baby, this tiny, perfect human with dark hair and Sarah's exact nose. I remember thinking that this was it. This was the life we dreamed about, raising our children together in those houses on the same street. 6 months later, everything fell apart. Sarah started feeling tired all the time, losing weight despite eating normally, experiencing back pain she couldn't shake. The diagnosis came fast and brutal. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, already spread throughout her body, inoperable, untreatable in any meaningful way. She was dead within 8 weeks, gone so fast that none of us had time to process what was happening. Tom was absolutely destroyed. 27 years old, suddenly a widower with a 6-month-old daughter, trying to figure out how to navigate grief while keeping a baby alive. Michael and I stepped in immediately, because that's what you do when your best friend dies and leaves behind a motherless child. We helped with Emma constantly, taking her for entire weekends so Tom could sleep or cry or just sit in silence. I did the daycare pickups when Tom's work schedule wouldn't allow it. We threw her birthday parties, attended every school event, showed up for every milestone that Sarah should have been there to witness. I watched that little girl grow up, celebrating her first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. She called me Aunt Diane. She called Michael Uncle Mike. We were her family in every way that mattered. When Tom remarried 5 years later to a woman named Jennifer, who was kind but struggled to connect with Emma, we stayed close to that little girl. When she struggled in high school with bullying and academic pressure, I was the one she called crying at midnight. When she got accepted to college with a partial scholarship, I was there helping her pack, buying her dorm room essentials, making sure she had everything she needed to start this new chapter. I loved her like she was my own daughter. I genuinely, completely loved her. I thought Michael felt the same way. I thought he looked at her and saw our niece, the daughter of our closest friends, a girl we had a responsibility to protect and nurture. I thought he saw her as family, as someone fundamentally off limits in every possible way. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong about what he actually saw when he looked at her. The first crack in my perception appeared 5 years ago, though I didn't recognize it as a warning sign at the time. Emma was 19, home from college for the summer, working part-time at a coffee shop near campus to save money for textbooks. Michael started offering to pick her up from her shifts, volunteering before I could even suggest it. No reason for her to take the bus when I'm driving right by anyway, he'd say with that casual tone that made it seem perfectly reasonable, perfectly innocent. I thought it was sweet at the time. Uncle Mike looking out for his niece, making sure she got home safely, being the protective father figure she'd lost when Sarah died. I actually praised him for it, told him how good it was that Emma had a stable male role model in her life. Then, I started noticing he asked about her constantly. How's Emma doing with her classes? Has Emma mentioned if she's seeing anyone? Emma looked upset yesterday when I saw her. Did something happen? Did she talk to you about anything bothering her? I told myself he was just being caring, being paternal, taking his role as her uncle seriously. But looking back now, I can see what was actually happening. He was gathering information, mapping her emotional landscape, figuring out her vulnerabilities, and how to position himself as the solution to whatever problems she was facing. 2 years ago, I saw a text message on his phone, just a glimpse before he snatched the device away from me. Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the blue dress. The words were there for maybe 3 seconds before he grabbed his phone off the counter, but they burned into my memory. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though my heart was already racing. Client, he said, without hesitation, already typing a response. Big case. Needs a lot of hand-holding and attention. You know how it is. And I did know how it was. Because Michael's a lawyer, a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, the kind of place where clients pay thousands of dollars for access and reassurance. Long hours were completely normal in his profession. Late nights were not just expected but required for someone at his level. Evening meetings, weekend calls, cases that demanded constant attention, all of it was part of the career I'd supported for 26 years. So I believed him. I pushed down the tiny voice in my head that whispered something was wrong, and I believed the explanation he offered. Over the next 2 years, he became someone I barely recognized. New cologne appeared in our bathroom, expensive brands he'd never worn before, scents that seemed designed to appeal to someone younger. He got a gym membership and actually used it, leaving the house at 6 in the morning to work out, coming back showered and energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. Hair dye appeared to cover the gray that had been creeping in at his temples. Expensive clothes filled his closet, tailored shirts and designer jeans that seemed too young for a man in his 50s. He put a password on his phone for the first time in our entire marriage, claiming it was for work, security, and client confidentiality. He became distant in bed, turning away from me, claiming exhaustion or stress. He was distracted at dinner, checking his phone constantly, barely participating in conversations that used to engage him. But it was the jewelry receipt that finally shattered my ability to rationalize what was happening. 3 months ago, I found a Tiffany receipt in his car, tucked into the side pocket of the driver's door, where he probably thought I'd never look. Diamond necklace, 14-karat white gold, premium quality stones, total cost $4,800. I stood there in our garage, holding that piece of paper, trying to remember if I'd ever received a diamond necklace from him. Not for our anniversary, not for my birthday, not for Christmas or Valentine's Day or any other occasion in 26 years of marriage. I'd never owned a diamond necklace at all. That's when I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore, couldn't rationalize or explain away the evidence that had been accumulating for years. That's when I hired the detective, a woman named Laura Chen, who'd been recommended by a friend who'd been through a similar situation. Laura worked fast, faster than I expected. Within a week, she had photographs, surveillance images that made everything real in a way I wasn't prepared to handle. My husband entering an apartment downtown, a building I'd never seen before, a neighborhood he had no business being in, not alone, with a young woman. The photos showed long, dark hair, a slender build, someone clearly decades younger than me, but you couldn't see her face in those initial images. Just her silhouette, her posture, the way she leaned into him as they walked toward the building entrance. Her name is Emma Collins, Laura told me during our second meeting, sliding a background report across her desk. 24 years old, works part-time at an art gallery downtown, lives in an apartment in the building where your husband was photographed. Emma Collins. The name hit me like a physical blow, but my brain immediately started trying to protect me from the obvious conclusion. There had to be another Emma Collins. It was a common enough name, right? There were probably dozens of Emma Collinses in this city. Not our Emma, not Sarah's daughter, not the girl I'd helped raise from infancy. Not the child who'd called me Aunt Diane, who'd sat at my dinner table hundreds of times, who'd cried in my arms about boys in school, and the mother she barely remembered. The coincidence of the name was just that, a coincidence, nothing more. I need you to get me a clear photo of her face, I told Laura, my voice shaking despite my attempts to stay calm. I need to be absolutely certain who this woman is before I make any decisions. 2 days later, Laura called me to her office and slid a photograph across her desk, a clear, high-resolution image that left no room for doubt or denial, and my entire world shattered into pieces. I knew I'd never be able to put back together. It was her. Emma. Our Emma. Sarah's Emma. The girl I'd loved like a daughter for 23 years. Kissing my husband outside that apartment building, his hand on her lower back in a way that was unmistakably intimate, possessive. Her laughing at something he'd said, her face tilted up toward his with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself once. She was looking at him the way I used to look at him 26 years ago, when we were young and in love, and the future felt infinite and full of promise. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing even though the evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and devastating. Laura was talking, her voice coming from somewhere far away, saying something about more surveillance, gathering evidence, finding an attorney, building a case. But all I could hear was white noise, a rushing sound in my ears that drowned out everything else. And all I could see was Emma at different ages, memories flooding through my mind in rapid succession. 6 months old in my arms at Sarah's funeral, sleeping peacefully while I cried into her blanket. 3 years old at her birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across her face, laughing with pure joy. 8 years old, crying because kids at school were being mean, asking me why her mommy had to die. 16. nervous about her first date, asking me how to know if a boy really liked her. 21, graduating from college, thanking me in her speech for being the mother figure she'd needed. And now, 24, sleeping with my husband, the man she'd called Uncle Mike her entire life, the man who should have been protecting her, not manipulating her into bed. That's when the grief started transforming into something else, something harder and colder and more focused. Rage, pure, clarifying rage that burned away the shock and pain and left only determination. This didn't just need to end. It needed to be exposed, dragged into the light, examined by everyone who needed to see what kind of man my husband really was. Every lie needed to be documented. Every manipulation needed to be proven. Every disgusting, predatory moment needed to be captured and presented as evidence. But first, I needed to know everything. How long had this been going on? How did it start? Was Emma a victim of his grooming, a young woman who'd been manipulated by someone she trusted? Or was she a willing participant in destroying my life, someone who knew exactly what she was doing when she started sleeping with her dead mother's best friend's husband? What I discovered over the next 6 weeks was worse than I ever imagined. So much worse than a simple affair, worse than a midlife crisis, worse than anything I could have predicted when I first found that Tiffany receipt. The evidence that Laura uncovered, the timeline she constructed, the messages she recovered, all of it painted a picture that made me physically sick. And it would all lead to that moment. Standing in a hospital room, staring at a girl I'd once loved like a daughter, seeing her wearing that $4,800 diamond necklace, realizing I'd been betrayed by 2 people I trusted completely. But here's what you need to understand. Only one of them would face real consequences for what they'd done. Only one of them would lose everything. And by the end of this story, you'll know exactly why. Laura's investigation went deeper than I could have imagined, pulling threads I didn't even know existed. Bank records, credit card statements, emails, text message recovery from cloud backups he thought were private. She had access to everything. Connections with forensic accountants and digital recovery specialists who could reconstruct deleted conversations and track financial transactions going back years. The apartment downtown, the one where I'd seen them in those photographs, had been leased 18 months ago. It was in Emma's name, her signature on the lease agreement, but Michael was paying the rent. $2,400 a month, coming directly from our joint savings account, the account I'd been contributing to for our entire marriage. He'd categorized it as business development expenses, burying it among legitimate work costs where he assumed I'd never notice it or question it. The jewelry I'd never received, the gifts that should have been mine after 26 years of marriage, he'd bought thousands of dollars worth for her. The Tiffany necklace I'd found the receipt for, $4,800. A Cartier bracelet, $3,200. Pearl earrings, $1,100. Dozens of smaller items. Flowers delivered weekly to that apartment. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, theater tickets. Everything I'd stopped receiving years ago. Laura showed me the credit card statements with every purchase highlighted, every romantic gesture documented, every dollar amount adding up to a sum that made me physically nauseous. Over the past 18 months alone, he'd spent nearly $70,000 of our money. Money I'd helped save through my work as a physical therapist, through decades of being careful with expenses, through sacrificing things I wanted so we could build a retirement fund. Money that was supposed to be for our future, for the life we'd planned together. All of it spent on a girl I'd once bought school supplies for. A girl whose mother had been my best friend. A girl who should have been completely off limits in every possible way. I remember buying Emma her first backpack for kindergarten, taking her shopping for school clothes when Tom was overwhelmed, helping her pick out a dress for her high school prom. I'd invested in her life emotionally and financially for years, never imagining that she'd grow up to help my husband steal from me. Laura organized everything into neat folders, color-coded and cross-referenced, building a case that was absolutely airtight. Every transaction had a corresponding date, a corresponding lie Michael had told me about where he was or what he was doing. The golf trips that were actually romantic getaways, the late nights at the office that were actually nights in that apartment, the client dinners that were actually intimate meals with her. Laura built a comprehensive timeline from recovered messages, pulling data from multiple sources, including cloud backups, deleted text threads, and even messages he thought he'd permanently erased. What that timeline revealed made me physically ill, forcing me to confront exactly how long this had been happening and how calculated his approach had been. The first inappropriate message was sent 3 years ago, when Emma was just 21 years old, still in college, still calling him Uncle Mike, still trusting him as a father figure. Michael had sent her a message after seeing her at a family barbecue. "You looked beautiful today. That dress is my new favorite." Her reply showed how innocent she still was at that point. "Uncle Mike, you're terrible." Followed by a blushing emoji. His response was calculated and deliberate. "I'm serious. You're not a little girl anymore. You're a stunning woman." That was the moment it started. The moment he began shifting their relationship from familial to something else entirely. That's how it started, with compliments that seemed almost harmless at first. Attention that made her feel seen and special in a way that probably felt validating after years of feeling like an orphan, like someone who'd lost her mother too young and never quite fit anywhere. Within months, the messages became more frequent and more intimate. She'd write to him, "Can we talk? I'm having problems with Tom's wife. She doesn't understand me." And he'd respond immediately, "Of course. Coffee this week? I'm always here for you." He was positioning himself as her confidant, the one person who truly understood her struggles, the one safe place she could turn to when life felt overwhelming. The messages continued escalating. "I feel like you're the only one who really gets me." Then, "Is it wrong that I look forward to seeing you more than anything else?" And his reply, "No, I think about you constantly." He was grooming her, using textbook manipulation techniques, creating emotional dependency in a young woman who'd lost her mother and was vulnerable to that kind of attention. He positioned himself as her protector, her confidant, the one person who truly understood her in ways that nobody else could. And she was young enough, vulnerable enough, still grieving her mother enough to fall for it completely. 6 months after those first inappropriate messages, the texts turned explicitly physical. She wrote, "I can't stop thinking about last night." He replied immediately. She responded, "We shouldn't have done that. You're married to Aunt Diane." And he wrote back, "I know, but I can't help how I feel about you." She wrote, "This is so wrong." His response was classic manipulation. "I know, but it feels so right." He was making her feel responsible for his actions, making her feel like they were both helpless victims of some uncontrollable passion, when the truth was devastatingly simple. He was a 49-year-old married man, deliberately seducing a 21-year-old girl he'd known since she was 6 months old, a girl whose dead mother had been his wife's best friend, a girl who should have been completely off-limits to him in every conceivable way, a girl who trusted him, who saw him as family, who had no reason to suspect that his attention was predatory rather than protective. But he didn't care about any of that, didn't care about the betrayal of trust, didn't care about the power imbalance, didn't care about the fact that he was exploiting her grief and vulnerability, because this wasn't about love or connection or anything noble. This was about power and control and ego, about a middle-aged man who wanted to feel young and desirable again, who wanted the validation of having a beautiful young woman want him, regardless of who got hurt in the process. Over 6 weeks of intensive surveillance, Laura documented everything, creating a comprehensive record of his movements and behavior that left no room for denial or explanation. 3 nights a week, every week without fail, Michael went to Emma's apartment, the apartment I was unknowingly paying for with my own money. He'd tell me he was working late on a difficult case, that he had client meetings that ran long, that he needed to stay at the office to prepare for court. "Big case, honey. Don't wait up. I can't predict when I'll be home." And I believed him every single time because I'd spent 26 years believing him, 26 years trusting that he was who he said he was. Meanwhile, he was driving across town to spend the evening with her, bringing takeout dinners, staying until midnight or later, living a completely separate life that I knew nothing about. The weekends when he claimed golf trips with clients, the trips he said were necessary for maintaining business relationships and couldn't be avoided, Laura's photographs told a completely different story. She had images of him and Emma at bed and breakfasts upstate, charming historic properties with romantic gardens and 4-poster beds. Boutique hotels in the city with rooftop restaurants and couples spa packages. Weekend getaways to places I'd mentioned wanting to visit, but he'd always said were too expensive or too impractical or just not his style. But apparently they were his style when he was taking her instead of me. Romantic dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together. Places I'd read about in magazines and suggested for our anniversary, only to be told we should just stay home and save money. Theater tickets to shows I'd wanted to see. Art gallery openings. Wine tastings at vineyards I'd mentioned visiting. All the effort he'd stopped putting into our marriage years ago. All the romance and attention and thoughtfulness that had slowly drained out of our relationship until we were just two people living in the same house. He was lavishing all of it on her. But what pushed me completely over the edge, what transformed my grief and shock into cold fury, was Emma's private Instagram account. Photos she thought only close friends could see. Images she'd hidden from public view, but shared with her inner circle. Laura had gotten access through a dummy account, a fake profile that looked legitimate enough to be accepted. There were pictures of gifts, beautifully styled photographs of the Tiffany necklace laid out on white linen, designer handbags positioned artfully in golden afternoon light, enormous bouquets of roses and peonies that must have cost hundreds of dollars. The captions were what destroyed any remaining sympathy I had for her. When he makes you feel like a princess, followed by a crown emoji. Some people are worth the wait, followed by a red heart. Age is just a number when it's real love, followed by multiple heart eye emojis. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just a naive girl being manipulated by someone she trusted. This was a woman who knew he was married, who understood she was participating in an affair, who had made a conscious choice to pursue a relationship with her dead mother's best friend's husband. A woman who'd sat at my dinner table countless times, hugged me, called me Aunt Diane, accepted my help and guidance and love, all while secretly sleeping with my husband, and posting about it on social media like it was some kind of romantic adventure. The grief I'd initially felt for her, the protective instinct that had made me want to see her as a victim of his manipulation, started to fade completely. What replaced it was something colder and harder and more focused. I wanted her to face consequences too, not just Michael. Both of them needed to understand that their choices had destroyed real lives, real relationships, real trust that had been built over decades. For every lie they'd told, every betrayal they'd committed, every moment they'd smiled to my face while destroying my life behind my back, I wanted them both to pay a price that would make them understand the magnitude of what they'd done. I met with the best divorce attorney in the state, a woman named Catherine Morrison, who'd built her reputation handling high-profile cases and high-net-worth divorces. Her office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel and expensive artwork, the kind of place that immediately communicated competence and success. She reviewed the evidence Laura had compiled, spreading documents across her massive conference table, studying photographs and financial records and message transcripts with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "We have everything we need for infidelity," Catherine said, after nearly an hour of silent review. "The apartment lease, the financial records, the messages, the photographs. This is ironclad. You'll get a favorable settlement, probably 75% of assets given the circumstances." But I interrupted her before she could continue with standard divorce proceedings. "I want more than a divorce," I told her. "I want him disbarred." Catherine looked up from the documents, her expression shifting from professional sympathy to something sharper, more interested. "Tell me why you think that's possible," she said. So I laid it out for her. Everything Laura had discovered about how deeply his affair had infected his professional life. "Michael is using firm resources for this affair," I explained. "He's billing clients for hours he's spending with her. He's categorized personal expenses as business costs. He's hiding marital assets by funneling money through fake business accounts. That's fraud. That's ethics violations. That's misappropriation of client funds. That's grounds for disbarment." Catherine smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. "Then we build a case for the State Bar Association too," she said. "This isn't just a divorce anymore. This is a complete professional destruction." Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine and her team built our strategy with military precision. This wasn't going to be just a divorce, just a division of assets and a settlement agreement and separate lives moving forward. This was going to be a complete dismantling of everything Michael had built over his entire career. His reputation in the legal community, his partnership at one of the most prestigious firms in the state, his bar license, his ability to practice law ever again, his future income, his professional relationships, everything he'd spent decades building was going to come crashing down. Catherine prepared complaints for the State Bar Association, documenting every ethics violation, every instance of fraud, every time he'd billed a client for hours he was actually spending with his mistress. She built a financial case showing systematic misappropriation of marital funds. She compiled evidence of his affair that would be presented not just in divorce court, but to his professional oversight board. But I wanted one more thing before everything went public, before the lawyers and the courts and the professional consequences destroyed his life. I wanted to look Emma in the eye, to confront the girl I'd loved like a daughter, to make her understand the pain she'd caused and the role she'd played in destroying a 26-year marriage. I wanted her to see my face when she realized I knew everything, when she understood that her little secret wasn't secret anymore, that the romantic adventure she'd been posting about on Instagram had real consequences for real people. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to see the devastation in my eyes, to understand that calling someone Aunt Diane while sleeping with their husband wasn't just wrong, it was a betrayal so fundamental that it couldn't be forgiven or explained away. I didn't know it then, sitting in Catherine's office planning the legal destruction of my husband's life, but I'd get that chance to confront Emma sooner than I expected. 10 days before I was supposed to serve Michael with divorce papers, 10 days before Catherine was going to file complaints with the State Bar Association, 10 days before everything was going to explode into public knowledge, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer or a wrong number, but something made me pick up. "Is this Diane Foster?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" I replied. "This is County General Hospital. You're listed as an emergency contact for Emma Collins." My blood ran cold, my entire body going rigid as my brain tried to process what I was hearing. "There's been an accident," the nurse continued, "and we need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." "What happened?" I asked the nurse, my mind racing through possibilities, trying to understand why I was receiving this call, why Emma would still have me listed after everything she'd done. "Miss Collins was in a car accident," the nurse explained. "She's stable but injured. We need family here to make some medical decisions about her treatment plan." "I'm not family," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why are you calling me?" "You're listed as her secondary emergency contact," the nurse replied. "We can't reach her father. Tom's phone is going straight to voicemail, and her primary contact," she paused for a moment. "Her primary contact is Michael Foster. He's on his way, but we need someone here now to authorize pain medication and sign some consent forms." I hung up without responding, my hand trembling as I lowered the phone. Emma had listed us as her emergency contacts. Michael first, me second. Even while sleeping with my husband, even while destroying my marriage, even while posting about their relationship on social media like it was some beautiful love story, she still thought of us as family. She still considered us the people she could count on in a crisis, the people who would drop everything and rush to her side when she needed help. The audacity of it, the absolute audacity, made my blood boil. She'd been lying to my face for 3 years, accepting my advice and my help and my love while secretly sleeping with my husband, and she still had the nerve to list me as someone who would come running when she called. I grabbed my keys and my purse, moving on autopilot toward the garage. Laura had given me copies of everything she'd compiled, all the evidence organized into folders with photographs and financial records and message transcripts. Photos of Emma and Michael kissing outside that apartment. Bank statements showing the $70,000 he'd spent on her. Text messages showing how he'd groomed her, how he'd manipulated her, how he'd transformed their relationship from familial to sexual. I kept all of it in my car because I didn't want it in my house, didn't want those images contaminating the space where I lived. If I was going to confront Emma, and apparently I was, this was the moment. She was vulnerable, Probably scared, definitely in pain. Michael was supposedly on his way. But knowing him, knowing how he operated, he was probably still deciding whether showing up was worth the risk. I needed her to see the evidence, to understand that I knew everything, that her secret affair wasn't secret anymore. I needed to look her in the eye and see if there was any remorse, any guilt, any recognition of what she'd done to someone who'd loved her unconditionally for 23 years. And I needed to do it before Michael arrived and took control of the narrative, before he could spin some story about how this was all a misunderstanding, before he could manipulate her into staying quiet about details that might implicate him further. I started the car and drove toward County General, the hospital where I'd held her as a newborn, where I'd sat with Sarah during those final, horrible weeks of her life, where I'd said goodbye to my best friend while promising to help take care of her daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked into County General at 6:47 in the evening, the automatic doors sliding open with a mechanical hiss. The nurse at the emergency desk directed me to room 412 on the 4th floor without asking questions, probably assuming I was exactly what Emma had listed me as, family coming to help in a crisis. My hands were shaking as I waited for the elevator, 23 years of memories flooding back in rapid succession. Holding Emma as a baby, her tiny fist wrapped around my finger, teaching her to ride a bike in my driveway, running behind her while she wobbled and laughed. Braiding her hair for school photos, her sitting patiently while I worked out the tangles. Helping her through her first heartbreak in high school, listening to her cry about some boy who didn't deserve her tears. And now I was walking through this hospital to confront her about sleeping with my husband, about betraying everything we'd meant to each other. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and I followed the signs to room 412, my footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. I stood outside that door for 30 seconds, maybe longer, gathering courage and steadying my breath. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to let Michael handle this, to avoid the confrontation entirely. But the larger part, the part that had been accumulating rage for 3 months, needed to do this, needed to look her in the eye, needed to hear what she'd say when confronted with the truth. I pushed open the door, and that's when my bag hit the floor, the sound echoing in the small room. Because lying in that hospital bed was Emma, her face bruised and swollen, her left arm in a cast, monitors beeping steadily beside her. But that's not what made me drop my bag. It was the diamond necklace around her neck, the $4,800 Tiffany necklace, the piece of jewelry I'd never received in 26 years of marriage. My necklace, bought with my money, by my husband, now resting against her collarbone, like it had always belonged there. And the way she looked at me when I walked in, the expression on her battered face wasn't guilt or shame or even surprise. It was relief. Pure, genuine relief. "Aunt Diane," she whispered, tears already streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dried blood near her temple. "I'm so glad you're here." Those words, spoken with such sincere gratitude, such absolute trust, hit me harder than anything else could have. She actually believed I'd come to help her, to comfort her, to be the aunt figure I'd always been. She had no idea why I was really there. I stood frozen in that doorway, staring at this woman who'd called me Aunt Diane while sleeping with my husband, trying to reconcile the battered girl in the hospital bed with the woman in Laura's photographs laughing and kissing Michael. "Diane, I'm sorry," she said, crying harder now. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, Emma?" I asked, my voice cold and flat. She looked confused by my tone, probably expecting warmth and comfort and reassurance. "For making you come all the way here," she said. "For listing you as my emergency contact when I know we haven't been as close lately. I know you're probably busy, and this is an inconvenience." "That's what you're sorry for," I said. "Not for sleeping with my husband?" The color drained from her face. Even under the bruises I could see it happen, could see the exact moment she realized I knew. "I don't," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the photographs Laura had taken. Her and Michael outside the apartment, kissing on the street like teenagers. Holding hands, walking into hotels, standing together at restaurant tables, his hand on her back. "I know everything, Emma. The apartment he's paying for with my money, the gifts he's buying you, the trips you've been taking, The 3 years of messages where he groomed you into this relationship. You don't understand, she said, panicking now, her good hand gripping the hospital blanket. Then help me understand, I said, sitting down in the chair beside her bed, making myself comfortable because this conversation was going to happen whether she wanted it or not. Help me understand how the little girl I helped raise, the girl whose mother was my best friend, the girl who called me Aunt Diane at every family gathering, how you could do this. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, fresh tears falling. He was just there when I was struggling with things. He listened to me when nobody else would. He made me feel special and understood, and then one night things just changed between us. One night turned into 3 years, I asked. 3 years of lying to my face? 3 years of accepting my help and advice while secretly destroying my marriage? I love him, Diane, she said, and those words hung in the air between us. You love him, I repeated, tasting the words, trying to understand how she could believe that. Does he love you, Emma? Yes, she insisted. He said he's going to leave you. He's just waiting for the right time, waiting until things are better at work, waiting until the timing makes sense. The right time. I actually laughed, the sound bitter and harsh in that small room. Emma, he's 52 years old. You're 24. He's been telling you he'll leave me for how long now? 2 years, she admitted quietly, doubt creeping into her voice for the first time. 2 years of just wait a little longer. 2 years of you being the secret while I was the wife. 2 years of him going home to my bed after spending the evening in yours. He's going to leave you, Emma insisted. But I could hear the uncertainty now, could hear her trying to convince herself as much as me. Emma, he's not leaving me, I said, leaning forward. He's using you. That's not true, she said, her voice rising. He loves me. He's here all the time. He takes care of me. He buys me things. He says I'm the most important person in his life. He listed you as his responsibility at the hospital so he could control your medical decisions, I explained. So he could manage what you say to doctors and nurses. So he could monitor who you talk to about your relationship. He's not protecting you, Emma. He's controlling you. The way predators do with their victims. Her face changed, just slightly, the first real crack in her certainty about what they had together. Where is he right now? I asked quietly, checking my watch. She glanced at the clock on the wall. He said he was coming straight from work, she said. He should be here by now. The hospital called over an hour ago. Do you want to know where he actually is? I asked, pulling out my phone again. I showed her the live tracking Laura had installed on his car, a feature he didn't know about, a feature that showed his exact location in real time. He's at home, with me, where he's been for the past hour, having dinner, telling me about his day, pretending he has no idea you're in the hospital. No, she whispered, staring at the screen. He told me he had an emergency client meeting, I said. He doesn't know I know about you. He thinks everything is fine, that he's successfully juggling both of us without either of us figuring it out. You're not his future, Emma. You're his secret. And secrets get discarded the moment they become inconvenient. She was sobbing now, full body shaking sobs that made the monitors beep faster. Part of me wanted to comfort her. The part that had loved her for 23 years, the part that remembered holding her as a baby. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed, stayed cold and unmoved. Why did you come here? She finally asked. To see if you understood what you'd done, I said. To see if there was any remorse. To decide if you were a victim of his manipulation or a willing participant in destroying my life. And, she asked. I stood up and picked up my bag. You're both, I said. He manipulated you, used your grief and your loneliness and your need for a father figure. But you chose to keep going once you understood what was happening. You chose to lie to my face. You chose to call me Aunt Diane while sleeping with my husband. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Your mother would be ashamed of you. It was cruel. I knew it was cruel even as the words left my mouth. But it was also true. Sarah had been a good person, a loyal friend, someone who valued integrity and honesty above everything else. She would have been devastated by what her daughter had become, by the choices Emma had made. "Diane, please," Emma started, but I kept talking. "In 3 days, Michael will be served with divorce papers. In 1 week, he'll be reported to the State Bar Association for ethics violations and fraud. I'm taking everything: the house, the savings, his reputation, his career, his future. And you? You get to live with the fact that you helped destroy a 26-year marriage for a man who wasn't even willing to show up at the hospital when you needed him." I opened the door. "Goodbye, Emma." I walked out of that room and never looked back. That conversation would be the last time I ever spoke to Emma, the last time I saw her face, the last time I acknowledged her existence in any meaningful way. But it wasn't the last consequence she'd face, not by a long shot. Because what I did next, the actions I took over the following weeks, would ensure that everyone knew the truth. Everyone who'd ever sat at a dinner table with us, everyone who'd celebrated holidays together, everyone who thought they knew Michael Foster and Emma Collins, they would all learn exactly what kind of people they really were. Every lie would be exposed. Every betrayal would be documented. Every choice that led to that moment in the hospital room would be examined and judged by people who mattered. And neither of them would ever be able to escape what they'd done. 3 days later, Michael was served with divorce papers. Not at home where he could process privately, not through his attorney where he could maintain some dignity, but at his office in front of his partners during a morning meeting. Catherine had insisted on this approach, explaining that public service at his workplace would prevent him from hiding the affair or controlling the narrative before his professional community found out. The divorce petition was comprehensive and devastating. Adultery with detailed photographic evidence, misappropriation of marital funds with bank statements and credit card records attached, fraud with documentation of how he'd categorized personal expenses as business costs. 3 years of recovered text messages showing the grooming, the manipulation, the calculated seduction of a girl he'd known since infancy. Copies of everything Laura had compiled, organized chronologically, presented in a way that made denial impossible. He called me within an hour, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "How could you do this at my workplace?" he yelled. "How could you humiliate me in front of my partners? How could you make this public without giving me a chance to explain? How could you sleep with a girl I helped raise?" I replied, my voice calm and cold. Then I hung up and blocked his number. 1 week later, the State Bar Association received a formal complaint from Catherine's office, a meticulously documented case showing that Michael had billed clients for hours he wasn't actually working, hours he'd spent with Emma instead of preparing briefs or attending depositions. He'd used firm resources for personal matters, firm computers to book hotels for their getaways, firm credit cards for dinners that had nothing to do with client development. He'd committed fraud in his financial dealings, hiding marital assets and misrepresenting expenses. He'd violated ethical standards in ways that struck at the heart of what it meant to be an attorney in good standing. The Bar Association takes ethics violations seriously, especially when the evidence is this overwhelming, especially when it involves fraud and misrepresentation that could have harmed clients. They opened an investigation immediately. The divorce took 4 months to finalize, 4 months of legal maneuvering and court appearances, and Michael fighting every single point. Of course he fought. He hired an expensive attorney and tried every tactic available. He claimed I was being vindictive, that I was exaggerating the extent of the affair, that yes, he'd made a mistake, but it didn't warrant this level of consequence. He tried to argue that Emma had pursued him, that she'd been the aggressor, that he'd been weak and foolish, but not malicious. He wanted to split assets 50-50, claiming he'd contributed equally to our marital wealth. He contested the spousal support Catherine was demanding. He fought the reimbursement of money he'd spent on Emma. But the evidence was absolutely undeniable, and the judge assigned to our case was a 60-year-old woman who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had seen every manipulation tactic in the book. She reviewed every document Catherine presented, studied the photographs, read through the recovered messages with an expression that grew harder and colder with each page. "Mr. Foster," she said during the final hearing, "you engaged in a multi-year affair with a young woman you'd known since she was an infant. You spent marital funds to support this affair without your wife's knowledge or consent. You lied repeatedly to your wife, to your partners, to anyone who asked about your whereabouts or your expenses. You showed no remorse until you were caught. And even now, your primary concern seems to be your reputation rather than the harm you've caused. She awarded me the house, 75% of our savings and retirement accounts, substantial spousal support, and full reimbursement of the $70,000 Michael had spent on Emma. Michael's face when that judgment came down, when he heard the terms and realized exactly how much his affair was going to cost him, I'll remember it forever. The color draining away, the jaw clenching, the hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles went white. His attorney tried to argue for reconsideration, but the judge shut that down immediately. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, after I'd already moved out of the house and started looking for a new place, the State Bar Association made their decision. Michael Foster was disbarred permanently, his license to practice law revoked, his name added to a public database of attorneys who'd violated ethical standards. His 25-year legal career was over in an instant. He lost his partnership at the firm, lost his reputation in the legal community, lost any possibility of practicing law ever again. All because he couldn't keep his hands off a girl young enough to be his daughter, a girl he should have protected instead of exploited. As for Emma, her consequences were different, but no less devastating. Word spread fast in our community about her role in the affair, about the fact that she'd been sleeping with her dead mother's best friend's husband, about the betrayal of someone who'd treated her like family for her entire life. Our town isn't that large, and people talk, especially about scandals this salacious. Her father, Tom, Sarah's widower, cut her off completely when he found out. He called me actually, crying, apologizing for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting me from his daughter's choices. Your mother would be devastated, he told Emma during their final conversation, the same words I'd used in that hospital room. Friends she'd had since childhood stopped speaking to her, stopped responding to her messages, removed her from group chats and social media circles. People she'd known her whole life saw her differently now, saw her as someone who'd betrayed trust in the most fundamental way possible. She lost her job at the art gallery within 2 weeks of the divorce becoming public. The owner was a friend of mine, someone who'd known both Sarah and me for decades, and she made it clear that Emma was no longer welcome in her establishment. She moved out of the apartment Michael had been paying for because once the money stopped, once he was no longer funding her lifestyle, she couldn't afford the $2,400 monthly rent on her part-time salary. Last I heard, through mutual acquaintances, she'd left town entirely, packed up everything she owned, and moved somewhere nobody knew her story, somewhere she could start over without the weight of what she'd done following her everywhere. Part of me feels bad for her when I let myself think about it, the part that still remembers 6-month-old Emma with her tiny fists and Sarah's nose, the part that braided her hair and taught her to bake cookies and helped her through teenage heartbreaks. But the larger part, the part that was betrayed and lied to for 3 years, knows she made her choices. She knew Michael was married. She knew I'd been like family to her. She knew what she was doing when she posted those Instagram photos with their coded captions about age being just a number. She chose it anyway, chose the affair over loyalty, chose excitement over integrity. Actions have consequences, real consequences that follow you and shape your future and determine how people see you. She's learning that now, learning it the hard way, learning it through isolation and judgment, and having to rebuild her entire life somewhere new. I don't take pleasure in her suffering, but I don't regret it either. She participated in destroying my marriage, and she's facing the natural consequences of that choice. It's been 18 months since that day in the hospital. 18 months since I dropped my bag and saw Emma wearing my necklace. 18 months since my world shattered completely and then slowly rebuilt itself into something new and different and ultimately better. I'm 50 years old now, single for the first time in 26 years, navigating a life I never imagined I'd be living at this age. The house sold quickly once it hit the market. A young family bought it and seemed excited about the neighborhood and the schools. Too many memories lived in those walls, too much pain embedded in every room. I couldn't walk through the kitchen without remembering dinners where Michael was mentally somewhere else, couldn't sleep in our bedroom without thinking about all the nights he'd lied about working late. I bought a beautiful condo downtown instead, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines and absolutely no history. It's bright and open and completely mine. I'm still a physical therapist, but I scaled back to part-time, using the spousal support and my share of our assets to create flexibility I'd never had before. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for because I was too busy supporting Michael's career, attending his firm events, managing our household while he focused on becoming partner. I started traveling, real traveling, not just the occasional weekend trip Michael would agree to. I've been to Italy and walked through ancient ruins and eaten pasta in tiny restaurants where nobody spoke English. I've been to Greece and watched sunsets over the Aegean Sea. I've been to Ireland and driven through countryside so green it didn't seem real. I take art classes at the community center and have coffee with friends who've known me for years and supported me through the divorce. I read books in the middle of the day just because I want to, without feeling guilty about not being productive or useful. I'm dating again, slowly and carefully, learning to trust my instincts about people after being so catastrophically wrong about Michael. Trust doesn't come easy anymore. I find myself watching for warning signs, listening for inconsistencies in stories, questioning things I might have accepted without thought before. But I'm learning that not everyone is lying, not every man is hiding a secret life, not every relationship is destined to end in betrayal. And for the first time in decades, I'm genuinely happy. Not performing happiness for other people, not wearing the everything's fine mask I maintained for years while my marriage crumbled. Real happiness, the kind that comes from living authentically, from making choices that serve me instead of someone else, from building a life that reflects who I actually am rather than who I thought I should be. Real peace, real freedom, real joy that isn't dependent on anyone else's choices or presence or approval. If you're watching this story and something about it resonates with you, if your gut is telling you something's wrong in your relationship, if you're noticing inconsistencies or lies or behavior that doesn't align with the words your partner is saying, please trust that feeling. Your instincts exist for a reason, developed over thousands of years of evolution to protect you from harm. Don't make excuses for behavior that violates your boundaries or your trust. Don't sacrifice your peace of mind for someone else's convenience or comfort. Don't stay small or quiet or accommodating to make someone else's life easier while yours becomes unbearable. I spent 26 years building a life with someone, investing in our marriage, believing that our shared history meant something, that loyalty and commitment mattered, that the years we'd spent together created a bond that couldn't be easily broken. But to Michael, those 26 years were disposable the moment someone younger and more exciting came along. Our history meant nothing when weighed against the ego boost of having a 21-year-old want him. My loyalty was irrelevant when he wanted the thrill of an affair. That wasn't my failure. I didn't cause his choices by aging or becoming less interesting or failing to meet his needs. That was his failure, his character flaw, his choice to betray vows and trust and decades of partnership. You deserve a partner who chooses you every single day. Not just when it's easy or convenient, or when there aren't other options available. Even when it's hard. Even when you're both tired or stressed or going through difficult times. Even when attraction might exist for other people, because that's human nature. You deserve someone who protects your heart instead of handing it to someone else. Someone who treats your trust as sacred instead of exploiting it. And if you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s, thinking it's too late to start over, thinking you're too old or too set in your ways or past your expiration date for love or happiness or new beginnings, I'm here to tell you that's completely wrong. I started over at 49, at an age when I thought my life was basically set, when I assumed the major decisions were behind me and all that remained was maintaining what I'd built. My life now is richer and fuller and more authentic than it ever was during my marriage. You are not too old to rebuild. You are not too damaged by what you've been through to deserve better. You are not past your expiration date for love or joy or adventure or any of the things that make life worth living. You are worthy of real love, real respect, real partnership, built on honesty and mutual care. And if you're not getting that where you are, if your current relationship is draining you or diminishing you or making you question your worth, you have permission to leave. You have permission to start over. You have permission to choose yourself. That's what I did, and I've never regretted it for a single second. Thank you for watching my story, for staying with me through the pain and the investigation and the confrontation and the rebuilding. If this resonated with you in any way, if you found value in hearing about my experience or felt less alone in your own struggles, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps YouTube's algorithm share this story with others who might need to hear it. Women who are going through similar situations and wondering if they're crazy for suspecting something's wrong. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about resilience and justice and starting over. Because these stories matter, and this community matters. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because I love hearing from people all over the country and the world who connect with these experiences. Have you ever had to start over after a betrayal? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted Emma in that hospital room or walked away? I read every single comment, every message of support, every story people share about their own experiences. This community means everything to me. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose themselves, that they're not alone in what they're going through, that there really is life after betrayal, and it can be better than what came before. Remember that the end of something painful is the beginning of something beautiful, even when you can't see that possibility in the moment. Even when you're standing in the wreckage wondering how you'll ever rebuild, you're stronger than you think you are. You're more resilient than you know. And you deserve a love story that honors who you are, that celebrates you instead of diminishing you, that adds to your life instead of draining it. See you in the next story. With love and respect, Diane.